Hey friends, welcome back to Sleeping Historian. Before we begin, take a quick second to hit like, subscribe, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from or what you're doing right now. Alright, let's step back into history, where the truth is never as simple as we were told. Mystery 1, the stolen skull of Geronimo, they said. The war ended when Geronimo surrendered. They were wrong. Geronimo was never just a man. He was a symbol of defiance, fear, and freedom, Apache warrior who fought both the United States and Mexico for decades, refusing to let his people disappear quietly. Even after his final surrender in 1886, officials believed one thing with absolute certainty: Geronimo could never be allowed to walk free again, and so he spent the rest of his life as a prisoner of war, locked behind military fences, watched until the day he died. But what if captivity didn't end with death? Geronimo died in February 1909, officially of pneumonia. His body was buried at the Apache Indian Prisoner of War Cemetery at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, an active U.S. military land. That detail matters, because it meant his remains were never fully under his people's control. They belonged to the same institution that had once hunted him. Today, visitors see a small pyramid of stones topped with an eagle marking Geronimo's resting place. It looks official. It looks final. But here's the catch. Those stones don't mark an exact grave. They only mark a general area. His original burial was unmarked. No headstone, no protection. So what really lies beneath those stones? About a decade later, around 1917, Fort Sill became home to a group of young soldiers stationed there during World War I. On the surface, they were just officers in uniform. But privately, some of them belonged to one of the most secretive elite societies in American history, Skull and Bones of Yale University. And among them was a name that would echo through American power for generations: Prescott Bush, future U.S. Senator, father of one president, grandfather of another. Skull and Bones was already infamous for one thing: collecting trophies. Not symbolic ones. Actual remains, skulls, bones, objects taken from graves and battlefields, wrapped in secrecy and ritual. Then, in 1918, a letter surfaced. It was written by a member of the society named Winter McNone as a bonesman. In the letter, he casually bragged that Geronimo's skull and 2 femur bones had been taken from Fort Sill. According to him, they now rested inside the society's headquarters in New Haven, Connecticut, known simply as the Tomb. No ceremony, no apology, just possession. If that letter is true, then Geronimo, who resisted domination his entire life, was finally conquered in death. But was it true? Here's where the mystery fractures into shadows. Meade never claimed he personally stole the remains. He never even said he witnessed the act. Critics argue the grave was unmarked at the time, meaning the thieves might have taken bones from the wrong burial entirely. Others question whether Meade was even present at Fort Sill when the alleged robbery happened. And then there's another possibility, even stranger, that the letter was an inside joke. A hoax meant to shock or frighten new members of the society. A prank involving the skull of Geronimo. Yet there's another layer that complicates everything further. Some descendants on the Mescalero Apache Reservation believe Geronimo's people secretly moved his body shortly after his burial away from military land, away from possible desecration. If that happened, then what if anything was stolen? And if nothing was stolen, what bones are Skull and Bones really hiding, if they're hiding any at all? Society has never spoken. Yale University has consistently denied involvement, stating it does not possess Geronimo's remains, and that Skull and Bones operates independently. Convenient, clean, final, except history wasn't done asking questions. In 2009, exactly 100 years after Geronimo's death, his direct descendants filed a federal lawsuit. They sued the U.S. government, Yale University, and Skull and Bones itself, demanding the return of Geronimo's remains under the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. This was the moment truth might finally surface. Didn't. The case was dismissed not because the claims were disproven, but because of technicalities. The law, the court ruled, only applied to remains discovered after 1990. If the skull had been stolen decades earlier, it fell outside the law entirely. And when it came to the federal government, sovereign immunity shielded it from being sued at all. The door didn't just close, it was never opened. So today, more than a century later, Geronimo's final resting place remains unknown. His body may still lie beneath Fort Sill, anonymous and unmarked. Or it may have been quietly returned to his people. Or if the darkest version of this story is true, his skull may still sit in a locked vault in New England, an artifact of conquest disguised as tradition. A man who fought empires, reduced to a secret. And the silence surrounding him may be the loudest clue of all. If this story unsettled you, that's the point. History doesn't just forget, it hides. And here on Sleeping Historian, we pull those secrets back into the light. Mystery 2. The Girl in the Well. On a bitter winter night in 1799, a young woman stepped into the snow with a secret, and history never let her come back. Her name was Elma Sands, and she was just 22 years old. She lived in a respectable boarding house on Greenwich Street in Lower Manhattan, run by her cousins, Catherine and Elias Ring. Elma was known as thoughtful, quiet, and deeply private, but on the evening of December 22nd, something about her was different. She confessed to her cousins that she was planning to marry that very night, in secret, without witnesses. The man she intended to meet was Levi Weeks, a fellow boarder who had been courting her. Around 8 o'clock, Elma wrapped herself against the cold, stepped outside, and disappeared into the snowy darkness. That was the last time anyone ever saw her alive. By 10 o'clock, Levi Weeks returned to the boarding house alone. He appeared surprised that Elma wasn't home yet. He denied being with her earlier that evening. His tone was combative. Something about his story didn't sit right. Was he lying? Was he already too late to save her? When Elma failed to return home, fear spread quickly. New York City was blanketed in snow that night, muting sound and hiding tracks. Still, whispers emerged. Some witnesses claimed they had seen a young woman riding in a one-horse sleigh with 2 men. One of them looked like Weeks. The horse resembled one owned by his brother. Coincidence? Or the last glimpse of a deadly journey?
Days passed, hope faded.
Then children playing near a well in Lower Manhattan noticed something strange floating in the dark water below. A woman's hat. It was Elma's. On January 2nd, 1800, searchers lowered ropes into the well. What they pulled out froze the city in horror. Elma's lifeless body bore signs of violence, bruises, trauma, clear evidence that this was no accident. Someone had ended her life. Newspapers erupted. The story raced through New York like wildfire. Before any arrest was made, the public had already chosen its villain, Levi Weeks. Elma's cousins accused him openly, feeding details to the press. In coffee houses and taverns, his name was spoken with certainty. Justice, the people demanded, and they wanted it fast. Then something unsettling happened, something that would never be allowed today. Elma's body was placed on public display. For days, mourners and strangers alike filed past her open coffin at the boarding house. The crowd grew so large that the coffin had to be moved outside. People stared at her pale face, letting grief turn into anger, and anger turn into certainty. How could her killer walk free after this? Levi Weeks was soon indicted, and it seemed inevitable that he would hang. But Weeks had something Elma didn't: powerful allies. His older brother Ezra Weeks was one of New York's wealthiest and most influential builders. Desperate to save Levi, Ezra called in favors that stunned the nation. He assembled a defense team unlike anything America had ever seen. Alexander Hamilton, Aaron Burr, bitter political enemies. Men who despised each other. Yet both agreed to defend Levi Weeks. They were joined by Henry Brockholst Livingston, a fierce trial lawyer who would later become a Supreme Court justice. The courtroom overflowed with spectators. The trial became a national obsession. Everyone wanted to see whether justice in the young republic could resist influence or bow to it. The prosecution's case was entirely circumstantial. No eyewitnesses. No confession. They argued that Weeks seduced Elma with false promises of marriage, then killed her to escape shame, possibly fearing she was pregnant. Witnesses described seeing Weeks near the well that night. Others painted him as a man who used women and abandoned them. The picture looked dark, but not definitive. Then the defense struck hard. Hamilton and Burr didn't merely poke holes in the case. They flipped it upside down. They argued there may not have been a murder at all. Instead, they suggested Elma had taken her own life. Why would she do that? They brought witnesses who described her as emotionally troubled, lost, questioning the meaning of life. They hinted at secret affairs, even suggesting inappropriate relationships with married men in her own household. Elma was dead. She could not defend herself. The trial dragged late into the night. Jurors struggled to stay awake. Yet Chief Justice John Lansing Jr. refused to pause proceedings. He denied the prosecution a closing argument, an extraordinary move that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Then he addressed the jury. He stated plainly that the evidence was insufficient to convict. 5 minutes. That's all it took. The jury returned a verdict of not guilty. Levi Weeks walked free. The city erupted in rage. Many believed justice had been openly bent, that wealth and reputation, not truth, had saved Weeks from the gallows. Chief Justice Lansing was accused of betraying the public trust. Weeks fled New York, harassed and despised. He eventually rebuilt his life quietly in Mississippi, dying years later without ever facing another charge. And Elma Sands, no one else was ever accused. Her death remains officially unsolved, but the shadows didn't stop there. Hamilton and Burr would later meet on a dueling ground. One would die. Years later, Judge Lansing himself vanished without a trace. Some whispered that Elma's story carried a curse, or that guilt has a way of echoing through time. So what really happened that snowy night? Did Levi Weeks commit murder and escape through influence? Or did a fragile young woman fall into despair, a furious city invent a villain to satisfy its need for justice? The truth remains lost, somewhere between power, silence, and snow. And that unanswered question is exactly why stories like this still haunt us on Sleeping Historian. Mystery 3, The Headless Horseman, a ghost older than America. You're alone on a dark road. The night is quiet, too quiet, then you hear it. Hoof beats behind you, slow at first, then closer, faster. You push forward, heart racing. When you dare to look back, you see a rider pulling alongside you, tall, silent, wrapped in shadow. And where his head should be, there is nothing. This is the Headless Horseman, one of the most haunting figures in American folklore. But what if he isn't just a fictional ghost born from a single story? What if this rider is something far older, something that has followed humanity across centuries and continents? Because the truth is, the Headless Horseman didn't begin in America. Long before Washington Irving terrified readers with the legend of Sleepy Hollow in 1820, headless riders were already galloping through European nightmares. Different cultures, different names, but the same chilling image. A man without a head, riding relentlessly through the dark. Why does this figure appear again and again? In Ireland, the most feared version was known as the Dullahan, meaning dark man in Gaelic. He wasn't a ghost in the human sense, but a dark fairy from the underworld. The Dullahan rode a black horse, carrying his own rotting head under one arm. Its eyes could see miles in every direction. When he stopped riding, someone died. No escape, no bargaining. Some stories say he carried a whip made from a human spine. Others describe him driving a carriage built from bones and skin. Even hearing his name spoken aloud could bring misfortune. And according to ancient belief, he may have been the leftover shadow of a pagan god Crom Duva deity once worshipped with human sacrifice, often by decapitation. Christianity came, but the terror stayed. Germany's headless riders tell a different kind of story. In German folklore, they are often tied to the wild hunt. A ghostly procession racing across the sky or through forests at night. These riders are not always villains. Many are described as revenants, the spirits of wicked men punished after death. Their sentence? Ride forever. Some headless riders were forced to help the living as penance. They warned travelers of danger. They scared hunters away from forests where death awaited. Others hunted criminals, enforcing a moral order they themselves had broken in life. A punishment worse than death, eternal service without peace. So why did this ancient terror take hold so deeply in America? The answer lies with Washington Irving. While living in England, Irving absorbed European folklore especially, and German ghost stories through his friendship with writer Sir Walter Scott. He didn't invent the Headless Horseman. Instead, he did something far more powerful. He Americanized him. Irving set his tale in New York's Hudson Valley, a place steeped in Dutch colonial history. He filled the story with real family names, real villages, and a sense of local memory. This wasn't a far-off fairy tale. It felt close, familiar, almost true. And then Irving gave the horseman a terrifying identity: a Hessian soldier. During the American Revolutionary War, Britain hired German mercenaries, Hessians, to fight the colonists. They were feared, resented, and deeply hated. Irving transformed one of these soldiers into a ghost decapitated by a cannonball and doomed to roam the land where he died. Suddenly, the horseman wasn't just a monster. He was history that refused to stay buried. And here's the unsettling part. This detail may be rooted in real events. During the Battle of White Plains in 1776, just miles from the real Sleepy Hollow, a Hessian cavalryman was reportedly struck directly in the head by a cannonball. He died instantly. A brutal, unremarkable wartime death, lest someone later turned it into legend. Did Irving know this story? Or did folklore find him? Yet the greatest power of Sleepy Hollow lies in one lingering question. Was the horseman real? Irving never confirms it. The shattered pumpkin found near Ichabod Crane's abandoned hat suggests a prank possibly pulled by his rival, Brom Bones, and yet Ichabod is never seen again. Did he flee in terror? Or did something chase him into the darkness? That uncertainty is the hook that keeps the horseman alive. But why does this image disturb us so deeply? At its core, the horror is biological. Decapitation is absolute. It separates the mind, the center of identity, reason, and self, from the body. A figure that can still move, ride, and hunt without a head violates everything we understand about life. It's the triumph of chaos over control, a body without reason, motion without thought, violence without conscience. And maybe that's why this figure appears everywhere. Each culture reshapes the horseman to reflect its own fears: fear of punishment, fear of losing the mind itself. The archetype endures because it adapts. He is not one ghost, he is many. A warning riding through time. Perhaps that's why scholars still struggle to explain him. The headless horseman isn't tied to one place or one era. He rides wherever fear lives, wherever guilt lingers, wherever the past refuses to die. A shadow with no face, but far too familiar. That's why the horseman still follows us, and why he always will. Mystery 4, the first best friend, who truly tamed the dog? 14,000 years ago, someone made a choice that would quietly change the fate of humanity. It wasn't a king, it wasn't a warrior, it wasn't a moment recorded in writing. It was a simple, deeply human act of care. In 1914, workers digging in a quarry in Bonneburg Castle, Germany uncovered something extraordinary. Beneath layers of ancient earth lay 3 skeletons to humans, a man and a woman, buried together. But nestled beside them was something no one expected: dog. Not bones, scattered by time, not food remains, but a deliberate burial carefully placed, shared in death. This discovery, now known as the Bonneburg Castle dog, is the earliest undisputed evidence of a domesticated dog. Yet the real mystery isn't its age. It's how this animal lived, because the answer is hidden in its teeth. When scientists examined the dog's remains, they found signs of a devastating illness, canine distemper. Even today, this disease can be fatal. 14,000 years ago, without medicine, it should have been a death sentence. But this dog didn't die as a puppy. It survived for weeks, possibly months. Which means someone fed it when it couldn't eat, kept it warm when it was weak, cleaned it when it couldn't move. And in a prehistoric world where survival was brutal and food scarce, that care made no logical sense. Why would ancient hunter-gatherers waste precious resources on a sick animal that could not hunt, guard, or help them? Unless it wasn't a tool, unless it was family. That single detail shattered one of the oldest assumptions in archaeology, that dogs were domesticated purely out of usefulness. That humans tolerated wolves because they were helpful. This dog suggests something else entirely: emotion. But when did this partnership begin? That's where the mystery deepens. Archaeologists, who rely on physical remains, place the earliest dogs at around 15,000 years ago, finds like Bonneburg Castle across Europe. But geneticists tell a different story. Using DNA and molecular clocks, they argue that the split between wolves and dogs happened much earlier, possibly 20,000 to 40,000 years ago. So which is right? Bones say one thing, genes say another, and they don't agree. Some researchers believe the answer lies in Siberia, during the peak of the last ice age around 23,000 years ago. Brutal, cold forced humans and wolves into the same shrinking spaces. Survival blurred boundaries. Cooperation became possible. But geography made the mystery worse. For decades, scientists were split into two camps. Europe, they argued, had the oldest dog bones. Asia, others said, had the greatest genetic diversity among modern dogs, a strong sign of origin. Two birthplaces. One species. Impossible, or so it seemed. Then in 2016, a study changed everything. Researchers analyzed the full genome of a 4,800-year-old dog from Ireland, comparing it to dozens of ancient canids across Eurasia. What they found was shocking. Dogs in East Asia and dogs in Western Eurasia were far less genetically related than expected. The split occurred after dogs already existed in both regions, which led to a radical conclusion. Dogs may have been domesticated twice, independently, on opposite sides of the continent. One population in Europe, another in Asia. Later, as humans migrated, Asian dogs may have replaced or absorbed the European line, explaining why modern genetic diversity points east, while the oldest bones remain west. The mystery of where may finally have an answer, but the deeper question remains: how did wolves become dogs at all? For years, the leading idea was known as the commensal scavenger hypothesis, sometimes called survival of the friendliest. The theory claims wolves approached human camps to scavenge leftovers. The least aggressive wolves survived near humans. Over generations, friendliness became an advantage. Wolves chose us. It's an elegant theory, but there's a problem. Paleolithic humans were nomads. They didn't leave behind massive garbage dumps. Wolves are apex predators, not scavengers by nature, and they instinctively avoid other apex predators. Like humans, a wolf approaching a camp of armed hunter-gatherers wouldn't be welcomed. It would be killed, which leads to another theory, one far more emotional: the orphan puppy hypothesis. This idea suggests humans actively took wolf pups from dens, raised them, bonded with them during their critical socialization window. Over generations, humans selectively raised the friendliest, most cooperative animals. It's not passive domestication, intentional. This theory fits the evidence from Bonneberg perfectly. A sick puppy would not have survived without deep emotional investment. Someone cared. Someone loved. And that love rewired evolution. As wolves transformed into proto-dogs, a cascade of changes followed: shorter snouts, smaller teeth, floppy ears, wagging tails. Scientists call this domestication syndrome, caused by selecting for reduced fear and aggression. The most astonishing change happened in the brain. Modern dogs carry genetic variations linked to extreme social trust. When faced with a problem they can't solve, wolves persist alone. Dogs do something different. They look to us. They read our eyes, our gestures, our intentions. They evolved not just to survive alongside humans, but to understand us. Better, in some ways, than our closest relatives, the chimpanzees. Over thousands of years, this bond shaped both species. Dogs helped us hunt, guard, herd, and survive. Then, in the last few centuries, humans reshaped dogs again, this time for appearance, creating the hundreds of breeds we know today. But it all began with one fragile moment: a sick puppy, a dangerous world, and a human who chose compassion over logic. That choice echoes every time a dog waits for us at the door, or trusts us with its life. History doesn't just record battles and empires, sometimes it records love. And here on Sleeping Historian, we remember those quiet moments that changed everything. Mystery 5. The day meat fell from the sky. It began like any other clear spring morning in rural Kentucky. No storms, no clouds, no warning. Then the sky opened, and meat began to fall. On March 3, 1876, residents of Bath County, Kentucky, witnessed one of the strangest events ever recorded in American history. Around midday, a farmer's wife named Mrs. Allen Crouch was outside making soap in her yard when something plummeted past her shoulder and hit the ground. Then another piece fell, and another, and another. Chunks of raw flesh rained down from the sky. Some pieces were as light as snowflakes, drifting gently. Others were several inches across, striking fences, grass, and tree branches with wet, sickening thuds. For several minutes, the Crouch farm became the center of a nightmare, bloody scraps scattered across an area nearly the size of a football field. Mrs. Crouch froze in terror. Was this a punishment? A sign from God? Or something far worse? The family rushed outside in disbelief. Neighbors soon gathered, staring upward at a perfectly blue sky that offered no explanation. No birds were visible. No aircraft. This was decades before flight. And yet, unmistakably, flesh had fallen from above. When the bizarre shower finally ended, the farm looked like a butcher's floor. At first, locals assumed it was beef, but when samples were taken to a butcher, he shook his head. It wasn't beef. Some thought it resembled mutton, but the smell was wrong. A hunter examined the meat and claimed it came from a bear. How could pieces of a bear fall from the sky? Word spread fast. Within days, the New York Times was reporting on the incident. Scientists, doctors, and skeptics demanded samples. Meat from the Kentucky sky was shipped across the country for analysis. What they found deepened the mystery. Under microscopes, researchers saw organized muscle fibers, clear evidence this was real animal tissue. That immediately destroyed one popular explanation, that it was merely frog spawn or fish eggs carried aloft by wind. This wasn't jelly, it was flesh. Another theory argued the substance was nostoc, a type of gelatinous algae that swells after rain and can resemble meat. But the sky had been clear. No rain, no humidity spike. And nostoc doesn't have muscle cells. Whatever fell on the Crouch farm had once been alive. As more laboratories weighed in, attention turned to a grisly but surprisingly simple explanation. Vultures. Bath County was home to turkey vulture scavengers, known for an unsettling defense mechanism. When threatened or needing to lighten themselves for flight, vultures regurgitate partially digested food. And if one bird vomits, others in the flock often follow. A chain reaction. The leading theory proposed that a flock of vultures had been feeding on a carcass, possibly a sheep, which would explain the mutton-like texture. Startled midair, they collectively disgorged their meal over the Crouch farm, a buzzard blast from above. It fit the evidence disturbingly well, yet problems remained. No one recalled seeing vultures overhead at the moment the meat fell. The spread of flesh was unusually wide, and the psychological weight of the event lingered. Even if vultures were responsible, there was something deeply wrong about meat falling silently from a clear sky. Some locals refused to accept a biological explanation. They believed it was an omen. In the 19th century, signs from nature carried meaning. Blood-red moons, eclipses, and unnatural rains were seen as warnings. To many, this felt biblical echoes of plagues, judgment, or unseen forces at work. And honestly, who could blame them? Even scientists admitted discomfort. One wrote that while the vulture explanation was likely, it did nothing to make the event feel less sinister. After all, chance alone had turned regurgitation into legend. Over time, samples of the meat were preserved, carefully stored, labeled, forgotten, but the mystery didn't die. As genetic testing improved in the 20th and 21st centuries, researchers realized something remarkable. The technology now exists to identify the exact species from which the meat came despite degradation. One day, science may finally answer what animal fell from the sky that morning. But even then, would that truly solve the mystery?
Yes.
Because knowing what fell doesn't fully explain how it felt to witness it. A clear sky breaking the rules, nature behaving badly, reality slipping for just a moment. Events like the Kentucky meat shower linger, because they expose something uncomfortable, that the world is not as orderly as we pretend. Sometimes random processes align in ways so bizarre they feel intentional, and when that happens, we reach for meaning. Was it vultures? Was it chance? Or was it a reminder that beneath civilization's thin layer of order, chaos still waits above our heads? On that Kentucky farm, the sky didn't just fall, it betrayed expectations. And that's why this story still unsettles us long after the flesh dried, scattered, and disappeared into history. Because somewhere deep down, we fear the next time we look up, the sky decides to answer back. Mystery 6. The Lost Colony of Roanoke in 1590. A man returned to an island expecting relief, celebration, and survival. Instead, he found silence. No bodies, no struggle, No answers. Only one word carved into wood: Croton. The story begins years earlier, when England attempted to plant its first permanent foothold in the New World, on Roanoke Island, off the coast of present-day North Carolina. Settlers struggled from the beginning, short on food, surrounded by uncertainty, and dependent on supplies from across the Atlantic. Their governor, John White, made a desperate decision: sailed back to England to gather help. It was supposed to take months. It took 3 years. War with Spain delayed all travel. Ships were seized. Resources vanished. By the time White finally returned in 1590, he feared the worst. What he found defied logic. The colony, over 100 men, women, and children, was gone. Homes had been carefully dismantled. Tools were missing, supplies taken. There were no graves, no bloodstains. No sign of battle or panic. It was as if the colonists had calmly packed up and walked into legend. White searched desperately for clues. On a fence post, he saw the word Croatoan carved deeply into the wood. Nearby, the letters Crow were etched into a tree. This wasn't random. Before leaving, White had agreed with the settlers on a simple code. If they were forced to leave, they would carve a message telling him where they went. If they left under duress, they would carve a cross. There was no cross, which suggested something chilling. They left willingly, but where did they go? Croatoan was the name of a nearby island, modern-day Hatteras, also the name of a Native American tribe known to be friendly to the English. The implication seemed clear. The settlers may have joined them, but White never found them. A storm destroyed his ships, forcing him back to England before he could investigate further. He would never return to Roanoke again, and the colonists were never seen again. Over the centuries, theories piled up like ghosts. Some claimed the settlers were massacred by hostile tribes, but there was no evidence, no remains. Others believed the Spanish killed them, but Spanish records show no such mission. Then there's the assimilation theory, that the colonists abandoned their failing settlement and merged with native communities, intermarrying, disappearing into new identities. There are whispers that some tribes later reported ancestors with gray eyes, English words, and strange customs. Archaeological finds hint at European tools far from Roanoke. Hints but no proof. Another theory suggests something even darker. Starvation forced the settlers inland, where they succumbed to disease, exposure, or conflict far from the island, leaving no trace behind. But again, no bodies, no evidence, no certainty. What makes Roanoke especially haunting is how orderly the disappearance appears. This wasn't a violent end. It was a quiet one, a choice. A migration, or perhaps a fatal miscalculation. Over 400 years later, archaeologists are still digging, still hoping, still chasing fragments of pottery, tools, DNA, anything that might finally explain where those people went. Yet the word remains: Croatoan. A message left behind not as a warning, but as a direction. One last attempt to be understood, and maybe that's what makes the mystery so powerful. These weren't explorers chasing glory. They were families, parents, children, people trying to survive in an unknown world. They didn't vanish in a blaze of violence. They simply faded. History remembers kings, wars, and empires. But sometimes its greatest mysteries are about ordinary people who stepped forward and were never seen again. Mystery 7. The Voynich Manuscript. The book no one can read. Imagine finding a book so strange that even the best codebreakers in history couldn't understand a single word of it. Not one sentence. Not one paragraph. Not even its alphabet. This is the Voynich Manuscript, a medieval book that has defeated historians, linguists, spies, and artificial intelligence alike. The manuscript surfaced publicly in 1912, when a rare book dealer named Wilfrid Voynich acquired it from a Jesuit collection in Italy. At first glance, it looked ordinary enough: aged parchment, hand-drawn illustrations, careful ink work. Then people tried to read it. The text was written in an unknown script. No known language, no recognizable grammar, no obvious cipher pattern. Page after page of looping symbols that looked intentional, but meaningless. Or were they? The book dates to the early 1400s, confirmed by carbon dating of the parchment. That alone makes it unsettling. This isn't a modern hoax. Someone, over 600 years ago, invested enormous effort into creating this book. And it isn't short. More than 200 pages filled edge to edge with text and illustrations, strange plants that don't exist, astronomical charts with unfamiliar constellations, women bathing in green liquid connected by winding tubes, circular diagrams that look scientific-y but explain nothing. What kind of knowledge required this kind of language? Some early scholars believed it was a cipher and encoded scientific or alchemical text meant to hide dangerous knowledge. Others suspected it was written in a lost natural language, one that vanished completely without leaving a trace. Then the world's best codebreakers got involved. During World War II, experts who cracked enemy military ciphers tried their hand at the Voynich manuscript. These were people who could break encryption systems designed to resist entire governments. They failed. Every statistical test showed the text behaved like real language patterns, repetition, structure, but didn't match any known system. It wasn't random, yet it wasn't readable. How can something be both meaningful and impossible to understand? Some researchers propose that the manuscript was a brilliant fake medieval prank or con designed to impress wealthy patrons, but that theory collapses under one detail: maintaining consistent linguistic structure across hundreds of pages without modern knowledge of linguistics would have been nearly impossible. Whoever wrote it understood language deeply. Others believe the book records lost botanical knowledge. The plants may be stylized or symbolic. The bathing figures could represent medicine, fertility, or early biology. The astronomical sections hinted astrology or early cosmology. But every interpretation runs into the same wall. Can't read the words. Modern computers have taken their turn. KI models, pattern recognition systems, statistical analysis, nothing has cracked it. Some models suggest it may be a form of shorthand or compressed language, or others hint at multiple languages blended together. No answer holds. And then there's the most unsettling possibility. What if it was never meant to be read by us? What if the manuscript was written for a closed group, or a single person? Or what if it encoded ideas so context-specific that, without the author's world, meaning simply dissolves? A message without a receiver? Today, the Voynich manuscript rests quietly at Yale University, digitized and publicly available. Anyone can look at it, anyone can try, and thousands have. Still no translation, still no key, still no certainty. It remains a perfect paradox proof that knowledge can survive, yet remain inaccessible. That meaning can be preserved. Without comprehension, a book that endured wars, fires, and centuries, only to outlive understanding itself. That may be the cruelest mystery of all. History gave us the artifact, but kept the truth locked away. Mystery 8. The man who wouldn't burn. The impossible case of Rasputin. They poisoned him. He didn't die. They shot him. He didn't fall. They beat him. He still lived. And when they finally threw him into an icy river, that's when he stopped moving. Or did he? The story of Grigory Rasputin is one of the strangest mysteries in modern history. Not because he lived an extraordinary life, because he seemed to refuse to die like a normal man. Rasputin was a peasant mystic from Siberia who somehow clawed his way into the heart of Russia's imperial court. He wasn't noble, he wasn't educated, he wasn't refined. Yet the Romanov royal family trusted him with the one thing they feared losing most: their son. The young heir Alexia suffered from hemophilia, a disease that could cause him to bleed to death from the smallest injury. Doctors were powerless. Every episode brought panic. Then Rasputin arrived. Through prayer, hypnosis, or something no one could explain, Rasputin seemed to calm Alexi's attacks. The bleeding slowed, the pain eased, the boy survived. To the Empress Alexandra, Rasputin wasn't just helpful, he was sent by God. But too much of Russia, he was something else entirely. A fraud, a drunk, manipulator. A demon hiding behind holy words. Rumors spread that Rasputin held sexual power over noblewomen, that he drank excessively, that he controlled the royal family behind the scenes. Whether any of it was true mattered less than how dangerous he had become. Because Rasputin wasn't just embarrassing the empire, he was influencing it. By 1916, Russia was collapsing under war, famine, and unrest. Many nobles became convinced that Rasputin's influence over the royal family threatened the survival of the nation itself. so they decided he had to die. A group of aristocrats led by Prince Felix Yusupov invited Rasputin to a private dinner. The plan was simple, elegant, final. They served him wine and pastries laced with cyanide, enough poison to kill several men. Rasputin ate. He drank. He smiled. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. No convulsions. No choking. No collapse. According to Yusupov, Rasputin seemed completely unaffected. Calm, almost amused. Panicking, Yusupov excused himself, returned with a revolver, and shot Rasputin in the chest. Rasputin fell. They thought it was over. Then Rasputin sat up, bleeding, staring alive. Witnesses later claimed he lunged at Yusupov, eyes wild, before staggering outside into the frozen night. Another conspirator fired again, this time hitting Rasputin in the back. He collapsed once more. The attackers beat him with a club. Still afraid he might survive, they wrapped his body and threw it into the Neva River, the icy water sealing their crime. Only days later was Rasputin's body recovered, and here's where the mystery deepens. The autopsy showed no poison in his system. The cyanide, if it was ever there, had vanished. Some claimed heat from baking neutralized it. Others believed the poison story was exaggerated to make the killers seem more heroic. But there was more. Rasputin had been shot multiple times. One bullet passed through his chest, another through his back. A third struck his forehead at close range, the kind of shot meant to ensure death. And yet, his lungs showed signs of water, which suggests something chilling. Rasputin may have still been alive when he hit the river, trying to breathe, trying to escape. The official cause of death became drowning. Not poison, not gunshots, beating, drowning. The man they tried again and again to kill may have died only when the cold water finally took him. Or did he? Some historians argue the dramatic elements were exaggerated after the fact, that Yusupov and the others reshaped the story to appear braver, stronger, and more justified. That Rasputin died more simply than legend claims. But even stripped of myth, the facts remain disturbing. He survived poison meant to kill instantly. He survived gunshots long enough to flee, and his body bore the marks of a death that refused to follow the plan. Even Rasputin seemed to know what was coming. Before his death, he reportedly wrote a letter predicting his fate, warning that if he were killed by nobles, the royal family would soon fall. Within 2 years, the Romanovs were executed. Coincidence or prophecy fulfilled? Rasputin's reputation lives somewhere between reality and nightmare. Was he a holy man, a con artist, political weapon, or simply a symbol of an empire rotting from the inside? Maybe that's the real reason his death feels so unnatural. Because Rasputin wasn't just a man. He was a warning. And when he finally sank beneath the ice, so did the Russian Empire. That final mystery closes this chapter here on Sleeping Historian. History may end the story, but it never truly settles it.